So I'm sometimes asked, where do I think Jesus first appears in the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Old Testament? People point to maybe different prophecies in the Old Testament, or what they think are prophecies pointing forward to Jesus. Where is the first one? A lot of people comment maybe Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, when God speaks to the serpent and says, I will put enmity, hostility between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, and he will crush your head and you will bruise his heel. And that's a powerful foundation prophecy for understanding all the rest of Scripture and the mission of the Messiah that is to come. This idea that a seed is coming into the world. But I think we can look even before that. In fact, I would go all the way back, not just to Genesis 1, but to the very first word of the Bible, in the beginning. In our English translations, it's usually in the beginning, unless you have one of those really new modern translations that says, when God started making the heavens and the earth, which is actually a really bad translation. In the beginning is the right way to start that translation. That's how it is in Hebrew. The beginning is Reshit, and to put in the beginning, it would be with the B, Breshit. So that's just one word. We have three words in English, in the beginning, but the Hebrew word is just one word. That is the first word of the Bible, the beginning, with the letter, what we would call the letter B, or the bet in front of it, making it in the beginning. Just one word. That is the very first word in the Hebrew Bible, Breshit, in the beginning. And this is where I think we would go to find Christ. You might say, well, how is that Christ? A couple of ways. When we talk about beginnings, we can mean, in Hebrew as well as English, we can mean more than one thing by beginning. We could say, for example, let's say a house is being built here in the neighborhood. I could say that house, the beginning of that house being built was on June 16th, 2003. That's when they begun to build the house. Giving as a time marker. At 10 o'clock in the morning on the 16th of June, 2003, they began. That was that time. But the beginning can also refer to something else. You can say the foundation is the beginning of building a house. A good foundation is the beginning of building a house. The Bible would use the term the beginning sometimes in this way. For example, it would say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It doesn't mean that you go and get the fear of the Lord at a certain time and place, and in that moment, and okay, then you've begun to grow in wisdom. No, it's this foundational principle that transcends the whole. The foundation of a house isn't just something that was there for a minute when you began building. It's there always upholding the whole rest of the structure. And similarly with the fear of the Lord being the beginning of wisdom, it's not limited to a distinct moment at time at the very beginning of the process. It's this foundational principle that starts but transcends through the whole. And when we come to the creation, we say that in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. It's not talking about just a particular instant. It is talking about how God made the heavens and the earth. Later, Paul would say it is through Christ that God has made all things, both visible and invisible, or, the heavens and the earth. That it is Christ is the creating principle, the foundation principle through which the whole universe, the things we can see, and the things we can't see, whether that's things we can't see like gravity or angels or love, all of this comes through Christ. Creaturely love, at least, all that comes through Christ into our universe. And material things, all of this comes from Christ. This is the foundational principle. Now, that goes back to in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. We get this term again for the second time. So this is used, Breshit, this is used at the very beginning of the Bible. It's used again in Exodus chapter 12, when Moses has come to liberate the Hebrew slaves from Egypt. And there's been all these plagues, 9 different plagues. And finally, they get to the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. And God goes to institute through Moses the Passover. And God says, the beginning of Hebrews chapter 12, he says, this shall be for you Breshit. This shall be for you the beginning. And this is when Israel resets its whole calendar system. It's no longer on this global calendar system. They would have been using the same calendars as the rest of the world. In Egypt, he says, this shall be the first of months for you. He completely gave them a new beginning, that this institution, this foundation, when he gives them the Passover, when he brings about the destruction of the firstborn on the 10th plague, it is a completely new beginning. And time was reset. It was almost like creation 2.0 with the introduction of the Passover lamb. It was a new beginning. It was the foundation, the beginning of the nation of Israel, in a sense, there in Hebrews chapter 12. That's the term that is used again. But it's also used again one other time in, fast forward to the Gospel of John. Now, the Gospel of John was written in Greek, not Hebrew. But if you were to read the Septuagint version, that is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that was translated and done before Christ came. In the BC years, when Israel translated their Old Testament into Greek, what's called the Septuagint, that word Breshit that starts, in the beginning, in Greek, it's NRK. NRK, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, when John then goes to write his gospel in Greek, what does he start out with? NRK. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. What John is saying is that the beginning that created all things, and the beginning that came through the Passover lamb, that was the foundation for Israel, has now come not just to Israel, but a new Passover lamb has come not just to Israel, but to the whole world. And what has been the result? Even though Jesus never called for it, the apostles never called for it, the New Testament never called for it, what has ended up happening? The whole world's calendar system has reset, and we have a new beginning with the coming of Christ. That all throughout the world, the Christian calendar is the dominant calendar. And even in other places where they might have a local calendar, or an Islamic calendar, a Hebrew calendar, a Chinese calendar, they'll have that, but then they'll have the global calendar, which recognizes Christ came into the world. What's the beginning of our calendar? What's the beginning of our years? It's Christ in the beginning. So if I were to find the very first place I find Christ anywhere in the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament, I'd have to start with the very first word. Jesus said at the very last chapter of the book of Revelation, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. That's how Jesus, the resurrected Christ, identifies himself at the very end of the entire Bible. Last chapter, in the beginning of the Bible, where it's told, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And in the very last chapter of the Bible, we see Jesus saying, and I am that beginning. All right, that's the first place I see Christ, but there are many more, and more even in the first chapter of Genesis. Until then.